We have been going through the book of Ruth from Mother's Day up until today. And by the way, some of you took baby bottles back on Mother's Day to collect money for a local pregnancy center down in Camdenton. And if you've forgotten that, don't panic. Just bring it next week if you would, and we will make sure those monies get delivered to them as well. And so we've been walking our way through the book of Ruth for Mother's Day, and we're wrapping that up here today. So if you have your Bible, I want to invite you to open up there to the book of Ruth. It's Joshua, Judges, Ruth. If you have your Bible app, find that there as well. And open up to Ruth chapter 4. I remember I come from a heritage of guys that are pretty handy. My father can do about anything, right? He's pretty good at that, and so he's been my hero for many reasons, but that's one of them. And so, but I didn't get that trait. Like, if you want help with anything, no one ever calls me, right? If you have light to mediocre heavy things, you might call me, but if it's heavy, you don't want me for that either, because I'm just not very good with those kinds of things. Until I figured out that if you go on YouTube, you can begin to find how to fix things. And so I've always heard people talk about that. And a few years ago in our minivan, the window one day just fell down into the door. I thought, I don't know. So I got looking online, and there was a YouTube video that showed how to take the cover off the door, take the old parts out, put new parts back in, and fix it. I thought, okay, I'm going to man up here, and I'm going to try it. And so I did it, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was a real man because I fixed something, and it stayed fixed, right? And it was fixed the right way. It wasn't just taped up there or something like that. And so I felt like I had finally entered the world of manhood because I had fixed something with a YouTube help video. And so wouldn't it be great if being a dad came with a YouTube channel that just said, here's how you do it? Well, I came across the channel for all these years. Our kids are all grown up now, and we want our kids to go to bed now, and for different reasons. But if you've got little kids, there's always that struggle of trying to get them to go to sleep at night, right? And so I found a video that shows you how, because we've all been doing it wrong for all these years. So take a look at this if you would. Here's your solution for all of you weary parents of young children.
Welcome to this instructional video on how to put a baby to sleep. Do you want to go to sleep? It's never really that easy. So the shush train. The standard blanket that you renamed Blanky. Works every time. Method acting. Oh man, must be time for you to go to sleep. Sleep time. Sleepy. Sleep. Ugh. You gonna go to sleep? The tap out. I'll go get your mum. The hypnotist. And sleep. The dad that doesn't know a single lullaby. Twinkle, sleep now. Do you want a piece of me? And sleep. The big awkward dad, giant baby sleepover. I'm coming in. I'm coming in. Lying down. Lying down now. And sleep. The bride dad. If you go to sleep, I'll let you climb the curtains tomorrow. They give up. Alright, high five. See you in the morning. See ya. Bye. The tiptoe. And that was how to put a baby to sleep. High five.
I have probably been doing it wrong for all these years, so I hope that helps some of you who are sleep deprived and just need your kid to go to sleep. You can feel free to thank me later. And so it would be great if there were YouTube videos to show you how to do this, and yet there's not, right? Life is hard, life is complicated, and life comes at us from many different angles, and it's difficult. And so when you and I open a book like the book of Ruth, it's always interesting to me that as you read through this story, what you find is that along the way, you're introduced to people who can kind of guide your path. And so we have looked at Ruth and highlighted some of her nobility and her character and encouraged us to start there with Ruth and Naomi back on Mother's Day. And today here on Father's Day, we want to kind of wrap up at the end of the book by looking at Boaz and focusing on him as we have the last couple weeks. But really, the exciting part of the day is we're going to read a genealogy, which is always people's exciting things when they come to church and we read a list of names that you have no idea who they are. And it's okay, because the preacher's going to say that matters, even though you think, I don't know why this matters to anything in my life. But we're going to pick up in the book of Ruth, chapter 4, beginning in verse 11. Let's set the stage here, okay? I can't tell you the whole story, but you can read it in probably 10 minutes this afternoon while Dad's napping, watching TV. You can read this. And so, but this set the stage for us. We have journeyed with Boaz and Ruth. I'm going to stop stuttering here and I'm going to speak. Naomi and Ruth, chapter 1, both lose their husbands. They end up in a situation where they were very desperate, no one to care for them, no opportunities. It's a very difficult time for them. Naomi describes herself as empty and almost deserted by God. She's at the end of chapter 1. She's depressed and just a lot of bad things going on in her world. Chapter 2, we're introduced to Boaz and Ruth. There's this romantic music that starts playing in the background as you flip the page into that chapter, because you know these two are going to be together and it's going to be good. They're going to get married and it's going to happen after. But then chapters 2 and 3 have to get us there. Last week we had to see that there were some legal things that needed to happen in order for Boaz to marry Ruth, and we saw that happened, okay? That's a very bad description of the book of Ruth because it's a lot better than that, so you read it yourself. But this is where it ends us up at. We just got the verdict that Ruth and Boaz can get married, and this is what verse 11 says. Then the elders at the city gate and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel." In other words, may God bless you with lots of kids and many blessings. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. I like that word famous, by the way. Note that appears twice in this text. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Now, those names don't mean much to you, but they are names that just indicate the idea, may God bless you with a family that grows, right? And just really do great things to this relationship. So, verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, now again, note how it shifts from Boaz and Ruth back to Naomi, back where this whole story started with this woman who lost her husband and lost her sons, and she's broken in despair. Note how the text shifts back to her at the end, because this son is going to be a blessing to her as well. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer." In other words, someone to care for you. May he become famous throughout Israel. There's that second word of famous. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who knows better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And then here's our exciting conclusion. Probably in English class, this is probably not the way they would have you finish your text. But it says this. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron the father of Ram. Ram the father of Amminadab. Amminadab the father of Nahshon. Nahshon the father of Salmon. Salmon the father of Boaz. Boaz the father of Obed. Obed the father of Jesse. And Jesse the father of David. The end. Okay? And so you read this story and you think, that's not a very inspiring text, right? You didn't come to church today, and this isn't a John 3:16 kind of passage, but out of it, I think there are some underlying themes that are worth talking about, especially here on Father's Day. And I want to speak to fathers, but everything I'm going to say today applies to every one of us at different relational levels. But I just wanted to encourage my dads today with a few things, a few observations that I think, as I look at this passage for me as a dad, that I hope will help you as well. Number one, here's the first one. You look at this passage, and just the implication in this text is that your kids are gifts. all right? Not gifts to give away, but they are gifts given to you, okay? Some of you are thinking, yes. But that's not what that means. This means they are gifts given to you. And where do I get that in the text? Well, the text, if you read those blessings that are given from the people at the city gates, you read what is said from Naomi's posse that she's hanging out with that speaks into her life, everyone implies that the gift of this child is indeed a gift. All right? Now, that's probably not rocket science to anybody. No one came in here thinking, man, that's deep. That's not deep, and your heads all know that, right? All of you in your heads, if I say, well, if you have kids, well, of course they're gifts. But here's what happens. The gift oftentimes becomes demanding. And the gift keeps you from sleeping. And the gift wants things from you. And the gift causes trouble in your life. And it stresses you out. And it makes you try to do things and answer questions that you don't know the answer to. And it puts you in positions that are hard and uncomfortable. And all of a sudden, this gift doesn't feel like a gift. And you know up here, I would answer the question, yes, it's a gift. But in your heart of hearts, you're thinking, man, this gift is wearing me out, and I don't know if it's a gift or if it's a burden, and you just begin to lose the enthusiasm of the gift. And so all through Hebrew culture, Old Testament culture, New Testament culture, whenever kids are brought up, it's just an implication that God looks at them and sees them as a gift. And I think it's sometimes helpful, especially for dads, to stop and realize, you know what, those kids that will not stop fighting in the back seat, those kids who, I'm not going to pick on people because my kids are here and they'll feel guilty, but all those kids who kind of stress you out and wear you down, they're a gift. And when we lose that perspective on our parenting or on our influencing of our kids, then all of a sudden we become lesser parents, lesser fathers than we could be when I realize God has given me a gift and I want to make the most of that gift. Psalm chapter 127 reflects this whole thinking of the Bible when it talks about kids. And this notion appears all over the place, that children are a heritage from the Lord. Offspring are a reward from him. And again, it's a gift. It's a blessing. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. And so, again, I just want to speak to dads to say that sometimes you get tired in the journey of being a dad, and you wear down, and you're thinking, man, how long does this last? Is this ride almost over? And it's just a reminder that from God's perspective, don't forget they're a gift, all right? On days when you're tired, frustrated, confused, just want to bang your head on the wall, those kind of days, just don't forget they're a gift, all right? Maybe a painful gift, but it's a gift. And treat it as such, and I think you'll be better off. And the second thing kind of goes with that your God is a provider. Not only are your kids a gift, I think this text reminds us that God is a God who provides. And that's what I love about this whole book, these 4 chapters, is you have a picture in simple, ordinary, everyday lives of how God is providing for his people. Now, there are no miracles. There is no manna from heaven. There is nothing supernatural at all in this book, except for God working through the things behind the scenes. But what you find is a God who, in chapter 1, when Naomi goes from having a husband and sons and life that is full and rich and all these good things, goes from okay to broken and empty, despairing, angry at God, not understanding God. And all of a sudden you come to chapter 2 and you find Ruth goes to a field because she's desperate for food and she has to feed Naomi and her. And she hopes she can just glean a little bit of food to make supper for the night. And what you find? You find God takes Boaz and he provides for these women in need. And that begins to grow. And not only are we providing food, we're providing emotional support. And there's this relationship that's both ways. God is providing. And finally, the whole kinsman redeemer thing of how God was protecting a family from just being pushed off the map. And he's protecting them and caring for them. He is a God who provides. And all throughout this book, you find God providing in everyday, ordinary ways, but using everyday, ordinary people to provide for the needs of everyday, ordinary people. And I think there's something comforting in that. I'll speak to dads. All of us feel this pressure, but for dads, a lot of times the pressure to be a provider is very real. I think it's something that's wired in a lot of us, that we want to provide, we want to do our best. And yet that pressure to provide sometimes makes us feel less than if we don't feel like we're measuring up to whatever expectations. Maybe we're comparing ourselves to unrealistic things, but maybe it's just the daily grind, and that pressure to provide can begin to wear you down pretty quickly. And oftentimes you hear people talk about midlife crises. And I think when you put 1 and 2 together, I think you think, why do men go through a midlife crisis? Well, I think it's the gifts no longer feel like gifts, and the pressure to provide puts so much pressure sometimes that you feel like, I just want to escape. I just want to get out, and so we'll go do something. I've had mine. I don't know if nobody's noticed it, but I started parting my hair the opposite direction 2 weeks ago. None of you noticed, but I'm getting wild and crazy in my mid-40s. And so you can just note that Chris is on his midlife crisis right now, okay? And so one of these days we'll come back and it'll just be shaved. It'll be done. So, but anyway, that's my midlife crisis. Anyway. I drive a minivan still, but I'm going to part my hair the other way. But there's this pressure to perform. One of these days I'm going to have a car that doesn't have sliding doors. It'll be awesome. And so, be a hearse. That's what that will be, I'm afraid. So anyway, anyway, focus. When you get to those places in life and all of a sudden you feel like, man, the pressure is hard and heavy, and maybe there's that pressure that maybe it's self-imposed, that I have to provide something for my family that maybe they don't expect, but maybe I just expect myself to do it. I think it's quite comforting to read a book like this and to see a God who in his nature is a provider for his people. And so as a father who has a heart to provide for his family, I take great comfort in a God who throughout this story has just provided for people. He's providing food for the hungry. He's providing homes for the homeless. He's providing fellowship and love for lonely people. He's doing all of these things as he provides for them. And so some of those days, guys, when you feel like, man, the pressure is there, I hope that you don't bear that burden alone. I hope that you realize that God is there and God is a providing God, and that he wants to walk along beside of us and be able to say, you know what, on those days when you feel that pressure, instead of just taking more burden on yourself, it's fine to be your best and work hard, but man, trust me a little bit too. And I think it's interesting that when you think of the whole Sabbath thing in Hebrew culture, that when God said, I want you to work hard for 6 days, I expect you to go do that, but on that 7th day, I want you to stop. I want you to cease. I want you to rest. And in doing so, I want you to trust me. And he builds into his rhythm of his week that I want you to just stop, and I want you to rest, and I want you to trust me that it's going to be okay. The sun's going to come up on that first day of the week. We're back at it again. But I want you to stop, and I want you to trust me. And so when you feel that pressure to provide, I think there's comfort in this book that God is a providing kind of God. Number 3, a third thing I think you learn from this book is that your example is powerful. Your example is powerful. You see, you can't grow virtue in people without having a good example, right? You've heard the phrase that character is more caught than taught. And that is true, right? Sometimes I get frustrated with my kids and I think, well, why are you saying that? Why do you act like that? Why do you think like that? Why are you like that? It isn't long before I'm looking in a mirror and I realize this is why they're like that, because they're catching attitudes, actions, things from me that I'm seeing played out in them. And my parents are here, so I didn't have any of those issues. So it skipped a generation to grandparents. Is that right? So we could, but we all do that, right? We go through things, and I think the book of Ruth and Boaz, the story that this tells, I don't know what Boaz was like at church. I don't know a lot about him, but man, you just get these glimpses of a guy who just was faithful in a lot of ways. What's he like when he goes to work? He walks to his field. He greets his workers with a godly blessing. And when there are poor people that are there to glean and to pick up the leftover stuff, he's not greedy. He's glad to share. There's a generous spirit. When it comes to Ruth and Naomi, he's got a generous, compassionate, loving heart. He wants to help, and he's not forced to do his responsibility. He wants to do it because there's this good and genuine heart inside of him. And I can't help but think, we're not told for sure, I can't help but think that example would rub off on his son, that his son would see that growing up and as he worked with him, and he would see that, and that would be caught in his life. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6 are familiar verses. They simply say this: trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. That's a wonderful, familiar passage of Scripture. But if you go back to verse 1, really what that whole passage of Proverbs 3 is really a father to a son. It begins in verse 1 by saying, my son, don't forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your hearts. Again, it's a fatherly, parental thing. Hey, I want you to know God. And there's this modeling of that is good and healthy for us to think about. And so his character, I think, was certainly a great example, but also just the way that I wonder when the son was born, when Obed was born, if he didn't grow up sitting around a campfire and mom and dad would start getting that look in their eyes and they'd start to tell the story again of this is how we got together. Remember, I was a foreigner and no one gave me a time of day and yet you welcomed me in, and he'd have to roll his eyes as he heard the story again and again. But I think his faithfulness in caring for Ruth would be a good one as well. And so just to know that your example is powerful in the lives of those who are watching. And number 4 is finally this one: your purpose should always be higher. I don't know if that sentence is a proper sentence or not, but your purpose, why you're here, should always be aiming a little bit higher. And it's easy, again, for us to get so consumed with the day in, day out. Let's just get through today, and then tomorrow we'll just get through tomorrow, and the day after that we'll just get through the day because there's demands and we're busy and all this stuff that's going on in our life. But as you read this story, what you find is that this story zooms in on a small few group of individuals. But then at the end of the book, it begins to zoom out. And so we go from Ruth and Boaz and Naomi, and we zoom out a little bit, and we're given 3 generations. And realize that the reason this story is included is because this is leading to the most famous king in Israel's history. But as you continue to zoom out in Scripture, what you find in the book of Matthew chapter 1 is that the next time Ruth and Boaz, or last time they're mentioned in Scripture, is in the genealogy that leads to Jesus. And so the writer of this book is saying, you know what, I've included this story for you. I've written this story for you so that you would realize that these ordinary, just very ordinary people, they're a part of something much bigger. And Hebrew people lived that way. They knew in their past, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they knew their story was a part of something bigger that God was trying to do in the world. And that was why they were there. And it continues on into Jesus. And now as followers of Jesus, we have the opportunity also to live for something bigger than just another paycheck or just another house or just another car, whatever it may be. We live for something bigger. And it's easy for us to lose sight of that in the busyness and stresses of life. And yet, I think this story hopefully will be a reminder to us that our purpose should be higher. Donald Miller is an author, and several years ago he wrote a book called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years. And there's one chapter in that book in which he tells the story of meeting up with a dad by the name of Jason. And they were talking, and Jason was very frustrated and concerned about his daughter, and she was heading down a path of some drug issues and was hanging out with people that were not going to be helpful for her future. And just concerned, and his heart was hurting for her. And as they were talking, Donald really didn't have a lot of answers, but he just mentioned in passing that she's just not living a very good story. She's caught up in a bad story. And they parted company, and they didn't see each other for a couple of months. And then Donald saw Jason and asked Jason how things were going with his family. And Jason told the story that things were going better. And Donald asked how. And so Jason said, I thought about what you said about the story that we're living for. And he said, we're not living for a great story. There's no risk. There's no excitement. We're not living for anything in our home. And so he went home and he did some research, and he found online an organization that builds orphanages all over the world. And he found a place in Mexico that needed $25,000 to finish an orphanage. And so he committed their family to do that. Now, he didn't have $25,000, but he went ahead and committed them to this goal, this pledge that he was going to build this orphanage for $25,000. So he got his wife and daughter together that evening and hadn't talked to his wife either, which is not a good idea, just for the record, young husbands. And so, but they got them together, and they just taken out a second mortgage. They had no money, and so he got them together and said, "Look, for too long we've lived for no story, for no bigger purpose, but we're going to live for something bigger in our family from this point forward." And they committed to that. And so the wife was furious at first, but as she heard this story and where he was coming from, she bought in as well. And the daughter began to come around as well as she saw something bigger, and she began to investigate and get and buy into this and help raise money and be a part of this plan. Now, that's not a fail-safe story. That won't work at every time, but it illustrates the idea that when we have a bigger purpose, a bigger story that we're living for that affects our decisions, our relationships. The story goes on to say how she began to really focus her life and focus relationships on people that were going to build her instead of tear her down, her decisions, all the things that she was doing. And so when you and I live for a purpose that is greater than ourselves, greater than today, greater than just fleeting things, our lives look different. When we read the text earlier, I asked you to note that 2 times the word famous is mentioned. And I thought that was an interesting word in that text. Both times they say, may he become famous in Israel, may he become famous in Israel. And I think that's an interesting thing. That may this noble person, may who he is and what he represents, may everybody hear that story. And I think it's a wise man, a wise woman, a wise follower of Christ who regularly prays, God, I don't want to be famous, but I want you to be famous through my life. And I want my life to live and be a part of something bigger that represents more than just me and what I can do in my short few years on this earth. I want to live for something grander and greater, and I want that to be you. I want your kingdom to be the thing that when I'm gone, that people will remember, hey, that person made a difference through their kindness, through their generosity, through their compassion. They were a Boaz kind of person in this culture because they lived for something bigger than themselves. May God be famous through our life. And so I think that's a healthy prayer that every man, woman, young person here can pray, is that God, I want you to be famous. I don't want to be famous. I just want you to be famous through my life. And so, dads, I want to encourage you today to realize that your kids are gifts, even sometimes when it doesn't feel like it. That your God is a God who provides, even when you're stressed and worried about it. That your character and your example makes a difference, even when you maybe think and hope it doesn't. And that ultimately your purpose needs to be about something bigger than just what you and I can do in our small lives, but it needs to be attached to something bigger, like the kingdom of Jesus. Would you pray with me, please? Father, I'm thankful